Chapter 7. Nancy Turns Sleuth. While Nancy Drew eagerly waited, scarcely daring to breathe naturally lest her presence be detected, Ada began to speak. "Well, if there should happen to be another will, we may be dumped," she said sourly. "I don't believe Josiah Crowley ever made such a will," Isabel replied, in so low a tone that Nancy scarcely caught the words. "Evidently Nancy Drew does, or she wouldn't be taking such an interest in those Horner girls," Ada returned. "I know she had them at her house last week because I was passing and saw them go in. Ugh, I hate that girl. If she should get her father interested, he might dig up another will." "Even if another will does turn up, we can trust Dad to take care of it," Isabel commented dryly. "You mean he would—" "Never mind what I mean," Isabel insinuated darkly. "Mother and Dad wouldn't be simple enough to let that money get away from us. It's ours by right, anyhow. Didn't Josiah Crowley live on us?" "Yes, we ought to have all of the money after enduring him for nearly 3 years. Just the same, I don't like the way Nancy Drew has taken up with the Horner girls. She always did have a way of nosing into things she had no business to find out." "Oh, pooh for her," Isabel scoffed. "Let her try to discover anything she likes. The money was given to us fairly enough." The conversation ended abruptly as Isabel and Ada rose from the bench and walked on down the street. Nancy waited until they were out of sight and then emerged from the bushes. "There may be a chance to find that missing will after all," she reasoned, as she sank down on the bench vacated by Isabel and Ada. Nancy had always been convinced that Josiah Crowley had made a second will. However, since her talk with the Horner girls, she had shared her father's opinion that the document had fallen into the hands of the Tophams, only to be destroyed. This conviction had discouraged her. Now, the information which she had gleaned from the snatch of overheard conversation gave her new hope. From what Isabel and Ada had said, she was led to believe that if Josiah Crowley had made a second will, the Tophams were as ignorant as herself concerning its whereabouts. "Anyway, it's encouraging to know the will hasn't been destroyed," Nancy told herself. "But there's one thing certain. If the Tophams ever get their hands on it, they'll take care it never comes to light. From what Isabel and Ada said, I judge they're beginning to realize their position is anything but secure. If I'm ever to find that will, I must get busy before they beat me to it." Nancy Drew possessed her father's liking for a mystery, and she delighted in a battle of wits when championing a worthy cause. Carson Drew had often remarked that he enjoyed the detective work of his cases better than the court work, but Nancy knew he was too busy with his own cases to devote much attention to the missing Crowley will. If anything were done to help the Horner girls win their inheritance, she must accomplish it herself. As Nancy reviewed the facts of the case, it seemed to her that she must have overlooked a possible clue. Never had a mystery appeared more baffling. For nearly 10 minutes Nancy sat lost deep in thought. Then, with a cry of delight, she sprang to her feet. "Oh, how stupid of me not to think of it before! The Horner girls aren't the only ones who should have figured in the will. There were a number of relatives, and Father said that they filed a claim too. I wonder who they are. If I could talk with them, it's possible I might learn something that would have a bearing on the case." Convinced that the inspiration was a happy one, she set off toward her father's office. He was engaged in an important conference when she arrived, and Nancy was forced to wait 10 minutes before she was admitted into the inner office. "Now what?" her father asked, smiling as she burst in upon him. "Is it a new dress you want?" Nancy's cheeks were flushed, and her eyes danced with excitement. "Don't try to tease me," she protested. "I've stumbled onto something important, and I want information." "At your service, Nancy," Mr. Drew said. "But if it's about that Crowley case, I've told you everything I know." Nancy poured out the story of her encounter with the Topham sisters in the department store, and told of the conversation she had overheard in the public park. Mr. Drew listened with interest until she had finished.
"And now, what is it you want?" he asked gravely.
"I thought if I went to those other relatives, I might be able to learn something which may help solve the mystery."
"A good idea, Nancy."
"But I don't know their names, and that's why I came to you."
"I wish I could help you, but I'm afraid I can't,"
Mr. Drew said regretfully. Nancy's face fell.
"Wait a minute,"
he called as she turned to leave.
"I can't supply the names you want, but I think I can tell you where to find them."
"Where?"
"At the courthouse. They should be on file."
He glanced at his watch and frowned.
"But I'm afraid it is too late to go there this afternoon."
"Oh, and I'm anxious to find out right away," Nancy declared in disappointment. "If I delay even a single day, the Tophams may get ahead of me and find that will." Suddenly her face brightened as she thought of something. "I know. I'll jump into the roadster and run out and have a talk with the Horner girls. They should be able to furnish me the information."
"You can try them, at least."
"That's just what I'll do," Nancy decided as she turned again toward the door.
"Just a minute," Carson Drew stopped her. "I wonder if you realize just what you are getting into, Nancy."
"Why, what do you mean?"
"Only this. Detective work isn't always the safest occupation in which to engage. I happen to know that Richard Topham is an unpleasant man when crossed. If you actually succeed in learning anything which may help the Horner girls, you are certain to have the Tophams in your wool."
"I'm not afraid of them, Father."
"Good,"
Mr. Drew exclaimed.
"I was hoping you would say that. I'm glad you have the courage of your convictions. But I didn't want you to march off into battle without a knowledge of what, undoubtedly, you will be up against."
"Battle?"
"Yes, battle. Rest assured, the Tophams won't give up the fortune without a bitter struggle. However, if they attempt to make serious trouble, I promise to deal with them myself. I only wish I had the time to help you find the will."
"And if I find it?"
"I'll take the matter into court."
"Ah, thank you. There's no one like you in all the world." Nancy moved toward the door. "I may not get back until rather late," she threw back over her shoulder. "I have a feeling I may discover a real clue today, and if I do, I'm going to trail it down." With characteristic impetuosity, she darted from the room, permitting the office door to bang behind her. Chapter 8. A Discouraging Day. After leaving her father's office, Nancy Drew went directly home. Quickly backing her roadster from the garage, she set off down the river road in the direction of the old farmhouse where the Horner girls lived. Before leaving the main highway, Nancy glanced anxiously at the sky and was relieved that no clouds were visible. "After my last experience, I don't intend to get caught in another storm," she admonished herself. The recent rain had made the roads rough, and Nancy bumped about in the roadster rather uncomfortably. At last, however, she came within sight of the farmhouse, and as she viewed it from a distance, noticed that it was even older and more run down than she had thought. The house was large and rambling, but apparently it had not been painted in years. Shingles were falling from the roof, and the porches sagged. As Nancy's eyes traveled to the old barn, she wondered how it had managed to survive the recent storm. If Allie and Grace Horner only had money, they could make the place attractive, she thought as she drove through the open gate. Squawking chickens fled before her as she stopped the roadster in the barnyard and switched off the engine. Springing lightly from the car, she ran up the walk toward the house. She paused at the kitchen door and rapped. Receiving no response, she went around to the front of the house and knocked on another door. There was no answer, nor did a tour of the yard reveal either of the Horner girls. Disappointment took possession of Nancy. She had driven nearly 15 miles, only to find no one at home. "I'm defeated at every turn," she thought disconsolately, as she slowly walked back to the roadster. "It's certainly discouraging." "Hello there," a voice called. Were you looking for us?"
The shouted greeting reached Nancy as she prepared to step into the roadster. One foot on the running board, she turned her head and saw the Horner girls hurrying toward her from the direction of the barn. Allie did not wait for her sister to open the barnyard gate, but swinging easily over it, ran to meet Nancy.
"We saw you just as you were leaving the house," she cried enthusiastically. "We wouldn't have missed you for anything."
"We were picking berries in the woods," Grace explained as she hurried up, slightly out of breath. Proudly, she displayed a tin pail which was filled nearly to the brim with raspberries.
"But look at our arms!"
And Allie laughed ruefully as she glanced down at the ugly scratches which had been caused by brambles and sharp thorns. "You must come into the house and have a dish of berries, Nancy," Grace urged hospitably. "They're good with sugar and cream."
"If you don't have them too often," Allie added.
"I can stop but a minute," Nancy declared as the three entered the house. "I came to talk about the will."
"Oh, then you have good news for us?" Allie asked hopefully. "Are we really going to get some of the money?"
"I don't know yet," Nancy was forced to admit. "So far, I haven't been able to learn a thing about the missing will." Allie's face fell, but she tried to hide her disappointment.
"We need the money so badly," she said with an apologetic smile. "Grace hasn't had a new dress in 3 years. She makes all of our clothing out of old things we happen to have in the house. If our luck doesn't change soon, I'm afraid we'll be mistaken for rag pickers."
"We didn't really expect much of Uncle Josiah's money," Grace broke in quickly, lest Nancy misinterpret her sister's remarks. "We weren't related, you know."
"Well, you can hardly say the Tophams were, for that matter," Allie declared. "They were 3rd or 4th cousins."
"We can get along without the money," Grace said quietly. "We manage very well when I have plenty of work. We're a little discouraged right now because dressmaking has fallen off. It's a slack season. I guess people would rather go to the store and buy a dress ready-made."
"I wouldn't," Nancy declared impulsively. "Grace, I'd like to engage you to make me a dress. Will you do it? I'll pay you well."
Tears of joy came into Grace's eyes.
"Will I? Oh, you don't know how grateful I am for the work. I haven't had anything to do for nearly 3 months. I don't mind poverty so much for myself, but for Allie—"
Her voice broke.
"I promised Mother I'd look after her."
Allie sprang from her chair and rushed to her sister. She flung her arms affectionately about her.
"Oh, Grace, I shouldn't have said what I did about needing money. I didn't mean it. Truly, I didn't."
"But it's the truth."
"We'll get along, Grace. If only my chicken money came in faster. Why can't a hen lay more than 1 egg a day?"
Grace smiled faintly at Allie's feeble attempt at a joke, and to break an awkward silence, Nancy took up the conversation. "I'll bring the dress material with me the next time I come this way." She did not need a new dress, but she realized that there was no other way to help the Horner girls, for they were too proud to accept money. "And now, I want to ask you a few more questions about Josiah Crowley," Nancy told them. "Do you know whether he ever visited other relatives besides the Tophams?"
"Oh, yes," Allie returned promptly. "He was only distantly related to the Tophams, you know. They were 3rd cousins, I believe. He had a number of other relatives whom he frequently visited."
"Before he went to live with the Tophams, they took turns keeping him," Grace informed her visitor. "Can you tell me the names of these relatives?" "Let me see." Grace lost herself in thought. "There are 2 cousins living in Masonville."
"Matilda and Edna Turner," Allie prompted her. "They're regular old maids, but awfully nice. They were wonderful to Uncle Josiah when he was alive."
"And there were 2 nephews," Grace went on. "William and Fred Matthews. They have a farm on this same river road. Everyone thought they would get something." "How far do they live from here?" Nancy inquired. "Oh, not more than 5 miles. You could drive there in a few minutes. It's on the way to Masonville."
"Then I'll be able to make the 2 calls on the same trip," Nancy announced as she arose to depart. "I must hurry along now, or it will be too late for me to stop there this afternoon. I am hoping that by talking with the relatives, I may learn something which will help us to trace the missing will."
"I'm afraid there's not much chance we'll ever get anything," Grace said rather morosely. "The Tophams will never let the money slip out of their hands."
"If we find the will, they won't be able to keep the money," Nancy declared. "Father will see to it that you girls get your just due." "Oh, Grace! We forgot to tell Nancy about Abigail Rowan," Allie reminded her sister. "She'd be apt to know more about the will than anyone else."
"That's right. You really should call on her, Nancy. She took care of Uncle Josiah one time when he was sick, and he thought the world of her. He often declared he intended to leave her something."
"Even a few $100s would have meant so much to her," Allie added. "Abigail is old and feeble now. She must be more than 70 years of age, and there's no one to look after her."
"Where shall I find her?" Nancy asked quickly. "She lives over on the Westlake Road," Grace responded. "It's a good many miles from here. You could make inquiry at some of the farmhouses along the road."
"I won't have time to go there today, but I'll surely call upon her as soon as I can. And now I must be going, or it will be dark long before I get back to River Heights." Nancy said goodbye hastily. The Horner girls accompanied her to the roadster and watched her drive away. As she looked back from the corner, they waved their handkerchiefs. "Plucky girls," Nancy thought. "Until today, I didn't realize how terribly they need help. I simply must find a way to help them." She drove along the river road, heading in the direction of Masonville. Although it was growing late, Nancy was determined to visit the Matthews brothers, and if possible, Matilda and Edna Turner. After she had gone perhaps 5 miles, she began to watch the mailboxes, and presently noticed one which bore the name Matthews. The farmhouse was set back a short distance from the road, and Nancy drove the roadster down a narrow lane which led to it. As she stopped the car, a man came out of the house and regarded her questioningly. Learning that the farmer was William Matthews, Nancy quickly explained her mission. At first, the man was inclined to distrust her, but after he had made certain that she was not a friend of the Richard Topham family, he talked frankly of Josiah Crowley and told all he knew concerning the will.
"My brother and I have filed a complaint with the proper authorities at the courthouse," he explained. "We feel certain there must have been another will, because Uncle Josiah always said that he intended to leave us something."
"Did you actually see the will?" Nancy asked hopefully.
The farmer shook his head. "No, my brother and I haven't the proof that he ever made a second will. But we do know that he never had any particular love for the Tophams. He felt that they took him in only because they were after his money, and I guess he wasn't wrong at that. Anyway, I am certain that he had made up his mind to cut them off without a cent."
"Perhaps he neglected to write the second will."
"That wouldn't be like Uncle Josiah. He was rather queer about little things, but he was always particular in attending to business matters. No, I'm more apt to think he made the will and hid it somewhere."
"You have no idea where he could have concealed it?"
"Not the slightest, miss. My brother and I will be glad to offer a substantial reward to anyone who can produce it."
Nancy asked a number of other questions, but the farmer was unable to furnish information which was of any value. Disappointed, she thanked the man for his trouble and continued on her way to Masonville. "Rumor, rumor," she sighed. "That's all I hear. At my next stop, I hope I'll acquire a few facts." Upon reaching Masonville, Nancy made inquiry and was directed to the home of the Turner sisters. They lived alone at the outskirts of the city. Although not in poverty, they did not have any more money than they needed. Nancy found them at home, and when they learned the purpose of her visit, they greeted her cordially. They were very pleasant ladies, and she spent nearly an hour at their home. But although they answered her questions willingly, she learned nothing which had a direct bearing on the missing will. Matilda and Edna Turner insisted that Josiah Crowley had intended to disinherit the Tophams, but they had no idea what could have become of the later will. They had been led to expect a small inheritance, and were disappointed that everything was to go to the Tophams.
"Why don't you talk with Abigail Rowan?" Matilda suggested at the conclusion of the interview. "She took care of Josiah once when he was sick, and he thought a lot of her. She knew more about his queer ways than any other living person."
"I don't believe it will do a particle of good," Edna interposed.
"Abigail is getting along in years, and her memory isn't what it used to be."
It was after dark when at last Nancy took leave of the Turner sisters and headed her roadster toward home. She was tired and hungry, as well as discouraged. "So far, I've only wasted my time," she thought despondently. "I'm no closer to finding the will than I ever was, and I'm sure there is one. I've often heard Father say that no real mystery is solved without a lot of hard work, and I'm ready to believe it." With the exception of Abigail Rowan, Nancy had called upon all of the Crowley relatives. From what the Turner sisters had told her, she was doubtful that a visit to her cottage would be worthwhile. Well, I suppose I may as well go there tomorrow," Nancy decided after a mental debate. "She's my last hope. If I fail there, I'll be forced to give up." Chapter 9. Vital Information. "This must be the house. It certainly fits the description given me." As she spoke, Nancy Drew paused before a square, one-story frame building, which stood dejectedly in the center of a yard overgrown with weeds and dandelions. The cottage was sadly in need of paint, and pickets were missing from the sagging fence which enclosed it. A boardwalk which led to the front porch had begun to rot away and offered treacherous footing. "The place looks deserted, but I'm sure Abigail Rowan must live here," Nancy assured herself as she made her way up the walk, gingerly avoiding loose boards which threatened to fly up at her. Early that morning she had left River Heights in her final quest for information concerning the Crowley will. Nancy did not know exactly where Abigail Rowan lived, but she had taken the Westlake Road and had made inquiry along the way. Neighbors had assured her that she could not miss the place, as it was the most run-down house along the road. "If Abigail can't help me, I'm at the end of my string," Nancy thought, as she rapped on the front door. There was no response to her knock, and she rapped a second time. She was about to turn away in disappointment when a slight noise within the house attracted her attention. She was certain her rap had been heard.
"Who is there?" a muffled voice called. "If you're a peddler, I don't want anything."
"I'm not a peddler," Nancy called out reassuringly. "Won't you let me in, please?" There was a long silence, and then the quavering voice replied,
"I can't open the door. I've hurt myself and can't walk."
Nancy hesitated an instant, and then pushed open the door. As she stepped into the dreary living room, she saw the pitiful figure on the couch. Abigail Rowan lay huddled under a ragged old shawl, her withered face drawn with pain. "I am Nancy Drew, and I've come to help you, Miss Rowan." At the words, the old lady turned her head and regarded Nancy with a stare which was almost childlike.
"You've come to help me?" she repeated unbelievingly. "I didn't think anyone would ever trouble themselves about old Abigail again."
"Here, let me arrange the pillows for you." Gently, Nancy moved the old woman into a more comfortable position.
"Yesterday I fell down the cellar stairs," Abigail explained. "I hurt my hip and sprained my ankle. I can't take a step without it nearly killing me."
"Haven't you had a doctor?" Nancy asked in astonishment.
"There ain't been a soul come near me," Abigail sighed. "I've just laid here on my bed and wondered how soon the end would come. I'm getting along in years now, and it won't be long."
"Nonsense!" Nancy protested brusquely. for she saw that the old lady's trouble had made her morose. "You have a good many happy years yet before you. Can you walk at all? Are you certain your hip isn't broken?"
"I can walk a little, but it hurts something awful when I do."
"Then your hip isn't broken," Nancy said in relief. "Let me see your ankle. Why, you haven't even wrapped it up. Where are the bandages? I'll fix it for you."
"There's a white rag in the closet in the kitchen," Abigail told her.
Nancy shook her head sternly. "A rag won't do. You have a bad sprain, and it must be taken care of properly. You really should have a doctor."
"I can't afford it," Abigail murmured.
"Let me pay for it," Nancy begged. Abigail shook her head stubbornly.
"I'll not take charity. I'd rather die in my bed."
"Well, if you're not set on having a doctor, I'm going to the nearest drugstore and get bandages and a number of other things," Nancy insisted. "But before I go, I'll make you a cup of tea."
"There ain't any tea in the house."
"Then I'll get some. What else do you need?"
"I need most everything, but I can't afford to pay for it. You might get me some tea and a loaf of bread. That's enough. You'll find the money in a jar in the cupboard. It's not very much, but it's all I have."
"I'll be back in a few minutes," Nancy promised. She stopped in the kitchen long enough to examine the cupboards. As she had suspected, they were practically empty. With the exception of a little flour and sugar and a cheap can of soup, there appeared to be nothing in the house to eat. Nancy discovered the money jar, but an investigation revealed that it contained less than $5. "It's probably every cent poor Abigail has in the world," she thought. Nancy did not take any money from the jar, but quietly slipped out the back door. Hurrying to the roadster, which she had left at the roadside, she drove to the nearest store and ordered nearly $10 worth of groceries. She wished that she might take a doctor back with her, but she realized that Abigail was set in her ways and would not accept the service since she could not pay for it. Before she returned to the cottage, Nancy stopped at the drugstore and purchased bandages and liniments. She carried the supplies into the house and quickly set about making Abigail more comfortable. She bathed the swollen ankle and bound it neatly with the clean bandage.
"It feels better already," Abigail told her gratefully. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't come when you did."
As soon as she had attended to the woman's immediate needs, Nancy built a fire in the kitchen range and put on the tea kettle. While she was waiting for the water to boil, she raised the drawn shades and permitted the warm sunshine to flood into the room. While she did this, she told Abigail Rowan something about herself. After the tea had steeped, she poured Abigail a cup and urged her to eat the nourishing meal she had prepared. She was gratified to observe that almost immediately the old woman became more cheerful and seemed to gain strength. She sat up on the couch and appeared eager to talk with Nancy.
"There ain't many folks that are willing to help an old woman. If Josiah Crawley had lived, things would have been different," she declared.
"It's strange that he didn't provide for you in his will," Nancy replied quietly. She did not wish to excite the old woman by telling her real mission, and yet she was eager to find out what Abigail knew about the missing will. She hoped that she might lead her tactfully into a discussion of Josiah Crawley's affairs without raising hopes which might never be realized.
"It's my opinion that Josiah did provide for me," Miss Rowan returned impressively. "Many a time he said to me, 'Abigail, you'll never need to worry. When I'm gone, you'll be well taken care of by my will.'"
"And then everything was left to the Tophams," Nancy encouraged her to proceed.
"That was according to the first will, but there was another one. I don't know what became of it."
"Are you sure there was another will?" Nancy inquired, almost too eagerly, for Abigail looked at her rather sharply. "Of course I am. I'm as sure of it as I am that I'm sitting here. Why, I saw it with my own eyes." "You saw it!" Nancy gasped. The old woman nodded gravely. "Mind, I didn't see what was in the will. One day, Josiah came in here, and I was sitting in my rocking chair, and right off I noticed he had a piece of paper in his hand. 'Abigail,' he said, 'I've made my will. I fooled them lawyers and wrote it myself.'" "How long ago was that?" Nancy asked quickly. "Let me see." Abigail frowned thoughtfully. "No, I can't remember the exact date. It was about the time Josiah went to live with Richard and Cora. Well, to go on with what I was saying, when Josiah showed me the will, he seemed mighty tickled about it. Mind, he didn't show me what was inside, but he hinted that he'd done well by me. 'But Josiah,' I said to him, 'are you sure it's legal to write it yourself?' 'Of course it is,' he said to me. 'A lawyer told me it was all right, just so long as I had it witnessed.'" "Do you know who witnessed the will?" Nancy broke in. "No, I didn't ask him, and he didn't say. He just went out of the room, chuckling in that funny way he had." "Haven't you any idea what became of the will?" Nancy asked hopefully. "I reckon he hid it somewhere. That would be like Josiah. But I remember he did say something about putting it where nobody can get it unless they have legal authority. So I don't know what became of it. For all I know, he may have turned it over to a lawyer." "Are you certain that was all he said?" Nancy inquired gently. She knew that Abigail had grown rather childish, and that her memory was failing. "It seems to me he did say something about what he was going to do with that will, but I can't just recollect." Abigail shook her head and sighed. "Many a night I've laid awake trying to think what it was." It seemed to Nancy that as victory was almost within her grasp, it had been snatched from her. Undoubtedly, Abigail Rowan held the secret of the Crowley will locked in her brain, and it was equally likely that she would never be able to recall the vital information, unless in some unusual way her memory was given a particular stimulus. "Try to think," Nancy begged. "I can't remember," Abigail murmured hopelessly. "I've tried and tried." She leaned against the cushions and closed her eyes, as though the effort had exhausted her. At that very moment, the clock on the mantel chimed 3. Abigail Rowan's eyes fluttered open, and an odd expression passed over her face. For an instant, she stared straight before her, and then slowly turned her head and fastened her eyes on the clock.